All right, so imagine that you are a little kid and you realize that you have all this artistic ability and like you can draw and paint and color so much better than all the little kids. And then imagine that you go to kindergarten and you start learning numbers and letters and colors and you just catch on. It just comes automatically to you, right? It's easy. And then as you go through school, you find out that science and math and all the other subjects are just easy, right? And you've got this academic gift, right? And then you realize also that you've got a really good ear for music and a good singing voice, and playing instruments comes really easily to you. And also, whenever you're out playing with all the other little kids, you realize that you can run faster and jump higher, and then you start playing sports and you realize you've really got a talent for sports. Now imagine that you were magically transported away from this world and you landed in some other world, but all of those talents and gifts, the academic proclivity, the athleticism, the artistic ability, the musical ability, they didn't come with you. You arrived in this new world knowing you should know that stuff, but not being able to do any of it. That's me. I have absolutely no talent for any of that stuff, right? And not only that, worse than that, I had no ability to relate to people, to communicate with people. Did not understand how interpersonal relations worked at all, right? Now, I'm not just talking about as a little kid. I'm talking about when I was in high school, right? Or even as this progressed over time, less and less, but even into college. So I tell you that story because I want you guys to realize that he read a bio of a lot of successes. But I didn't start there. I didn't have all those natural abilities that I talked about. They did not come to this world with me, right? So what I did was I built a life, block by block, incremental step by incremental step, without the gifts and abilities. Okay, so that's the hard way to do it, but it also allows you to understand exactly how it's done, which gives me a particular ability, and that is that I can teach other people how to do it, right? And so that's how I built my business, and that's how I help my coaching clients. Now, my coaching clients are very successful people already, but they're missing something. Each one, maybe it's a different thing, and I help them get past that barrier, over that hurdle, and find that thing that they can't find by themselves. Because I know how to build these skills and abilities from scratch. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. If I told you everything that I talk to my coaching clients about, it would take several hours. So I had to pick out some stuff. And what I picked out was to tell you guys how important it is for you to develop and maintain your own personal brand. Now, you might think a brand is something that you market out externally, but a brand has to start internally. And when you work in a company or when you own a company like I did, you realize that your brand comes from your core if it's done correctly. So you guys might have seen on ESPN a couple of days ago where Michael Jordan earned more last year than in his whole basketball career. He earned about $100 million last year, endorsing products, managing his personal brand, and he made about $100 million when he was actually playing basketball. Now, in a related story, Michael Jordan sued a supermarket chain, Dominic's supermarket chain, which was bought out by Safeway. He sued them because they used his name and his image without his permission. Okay, Michael Jordan's net worth, according to Forbes, is over $1 billion. He made $100 million last year. What does he care about suing somebody? What does it matter? He spent more on the legal fees probably than he could expect to get back. So why would he do it? Because it wasn't about the money at all. He's got more money than he can ever spend. It was about protecting his personal brand, right? It was about the integrity of if you put Michael Jordan's face or name on something, it has to match with who he is and who he wants to be, who he is at his core. I would submit to you guys that your personal brand is as important to you as Michael Jordan's is to him. Right? And it's not about the money or the fame. It's because that's all you have, your personal brand. So what we're going to talk about tonight is how to make your personal brand better, how to convey what you want to convey with your personal brand. And it's really about knowing, understanding how other people perceive you and then controlling that. Right? And so we're going to use a word over and over tonight, and that's intentional. You want to be intentional about your brand, about how you interact with people, about how you conduct your interpersonal relations. Now, I've given lots of public speeches, and for years and years and years I did them with no notes because I found when I tried to read the notes it messed me up. So I would just remember it and I'd do it with no notes. Lately though, I've been using these idea maps. This is an aside, because it allows me to not miss any points and jump around because I can see the whole speech right there. So it's a kind of a cool trick. All right, what we're going to start with is the first impression somebody has of you, the first impression they have of your brand. And that is when you shake their hand, right? So everybody's probably been told, don't have a weak handshake, don't have a limp handshake. That's true. Also, don't have a crushing handshake either, right? So the Goldilocks principle here, right? Not too soft, not too hard, just right. But there's a lot more to handshakes, and they convey a lot more information than just the grip pressure. So the first thing to know about a handshake is that the angle of your hand is extremely important. So this is a neutral angle. If you go to shake someone's hand, this is neutral, right? If you turn your palm up, that's an open presentation. An open presentation conveys a meaning to the person that you're shaking hands with. President Hines has the best open presentation I've ever seen. If you notice, if you ever shake hands with him walking through the building here, he presents his hand almost with his palm straight up, right? So what that's saying when somebody presents their hand like that is, I want to have an equal exchange, or even I want to give you more than you give me in this exchange. So when you present your hand, if you turn your palm up, you're telling the other person that they can trust you, that they should do business with you, that they should hire you. Now, they might not realize this because this stuff happens subconsciously, but it will affect them. All right, the opposite of that is if you present your hand like this, with your palm down. That's a closed presentation, and that's bad news, right? If somebody does that to you, what they're telling you is, I do not want an equal exchange. They're saying that I want to get more out of this exchange than I'm giving back. They're saying I want to dominate, right? All right, so the next thing about handshaking is rotation. Once the hands are clasped, if somebody rolls your hand so that they're then in the dominant position, that's really bad news. Because what that means is, I want to dominate this exchange and I'm not even honest enough to do it up front. I'm going to rotate my hand afterwards. So years ago, my wife and I were looking for houses. I actually ran by the house that this story's about today, and I thought, this is going to be in the story tonight. So this builder decided he was going to show us this house himself instead of having the real estate agent do it. Well, that was a big mistake on his part, because when we met him, when he shook my hand, he was kind of a big guy anyway, and he rotated my hand over like this, And at that moment, I decided I wasn't buying his house. He didn't know that, right? But that cost him thousands and thousands of dollars just doing that. So if somebody does that to you, be aware. Be aware that they don't want an equal exchange. And if you're really feeling cocky, twist it back. Which is fun because you see the reaction on their face when you do that. The other thing about handshaking is the extension of your arm. So how far you reach out from your elbow. And Dr. Hines does this very well too, because you see him coming from across the room. He's like this with his hand all the way out, right? And it may be because he's short. I don't know, but he arm extension it conveys openness also. That tells somebody, hey, I really want to talk to you. I really want to do business with you. I really want to meet you. I really want to work with you. So if you reach away from your body with your palm up, that's the perfect thing. That's the perfect way to make a great first impression. And to say to somebody, my personal brand is really cool and you want to do business with me, right? Now there's another little caveat here, and that is that if somebody keeps their elbow really close in, that's actually not bad. It's the opposite of reaching out, but it actually conveys a good message. And that is, I want you to come close, right? I'm okay with us talking in close proximity. I'm okay with us maybe being friends or doing business. So if somebody does like that, don't think that's negative. That's also good. All right, so handshaking is the first thing you do when you meet somebody. Almost simultaneously, though, the next thing is to look into their eyes, right? Oh, I missed the handshaking part. When you shake hands, make sure that your hands touch right here. This thing is called a pearly cue, right, between your thumb and your first finger. Make sure your pearly cue touches the other person's. Two things. If it doesn't, they'll crush your fingers and it'll hurt. But secondly, if it doesn't, it conveys a bad message, right? So make sure you extend your hand quickly enough and far enough so that they touch, okay? But as soon as they touch, look in their eyes. Because eye contact is super important. You've probably been told that many times. But eye contact is also adheres to this Goldilocks principle. So you don't want to stare at somebody. It's uncomfortable. It can even be intimidating. So you want to look in their eyes just enough and not too much. And some people, me included, have a difficult time formulating our thoughts when we're looking right in somebody's eyes. It's okay to look away when you're thinking about what to say. It's okay when you're building your sentence to look away, right? We're talking about milliseconds here. And the way to mitigate that, the way to make that exchange equal with the eye contact is when the other person's talking, don't look away. Look right in their eyes. Listen very intently. Now, when I say don't look away, I don't mean stare. You could go like, oh, I'm considering your point. But it's easier to look in someone's eyes when they're talking than when you're talking, so you can use that to kind of balance the exchange. But, now here's a cool little trick. When you want to make a point, you can look away to think about your sentence or whatever, but right at the end, the last couple of words, look right in their eye when you finish your sentence. It's like an eye bang. It's like an exclamation point at the end of the sentence, right? And actually, you may, even if you're comfortable talking while you're looking straight at someone, you may want to look away just so you can look back, because it creates this enthusiasm, right? It makes them interested in what you're saying.
I have a question on handshake.
Go, John.
Who goes first, male or female?
On a handshake?
If the female doesn't extend the hand, does the male go first?
Yeah.
Regardless, right?
I say, I can't recall being in a situation where there was a question. In many years in the current business environment or whatever, it's pretty equal. People extend their hands just as quickly. I don't know that I haven't noticed there's a male-female difference. But there's a good segue into something else, though. It is perfectly acceptable in our culture, in business, for opposite gender people to hug. I don't agree with it. I don't like to do it. But it's perfectly acceptable. And in fact, I do it with people who would be offended if I didn't. And there are people who, if I put my hand out, it offends them. So I'll hug that woman and, okay. But I don't like doing it. But it's acceptable. You just want to be real careful how you do it, you know. And you need to keep your distance and just touch them with your hands, maybe the side of your face a little bit. But so that may be the biggest difference in a man and a woman shaking hands or greeting. And here's another little thing. I just thought of this. Sometimes you'll shake somebody's hand, maybe same gender, and they'll pull you in and do a hug right with your hands in the middle. But anyway, just know that the hug is acceptable, but make it really quick and really generic. Like, all right. So there's something else about eye contact, and it fits in with handshaking. So when you go to shake someone's hand and look into their eyes to talk to them, and they're wearing sunglasses, they think you can see their eyes because they can see out, but you can't see their eyes. And it creates a barrier between you. So it's very disconcerting to try to talk to somebody and you're looking at the reflection of yourself back in their sunglasses. So if you're wearing sunglasses, take them off when you get into a conversation. Now, I had this experience with this guy. I was greeting him at church, and we were just going to walk past each other like this and just shake hands as we went. I don't really know this guy. He's wearing sunglasses. And just as he gets to me, he flips them up, and he extends his hand at the same time. That was a very cool gesture. That guy made an impression on me immediately because he thought to do it, right? It's just a little thing, but he just took that barrier out from between us. And he realized that was an important thing. Some people ask me how long you should hold a handshake. And I think it's about 2 beats, right? So 1, 2, let go. But you'll find sometimes that someone will try to pull their hand away a little quicker, and that tells you they're uncomfortable or they're defensive. And you do with the information what you will in the situation, but just know they're not quite comfortable. And maybe you should try to make them more comfortable or find out why. But if they pull their hand away quicker than a couple of beats. Now the other thing is some people will hold on longer. And that sends you a message too. That person wants to tell you something. And maybe they're reticent about saying it. Maybe they're shy about saying it. But if they hold on to your hand and you try to pull yours away a little bit, stop. And regrip their hand and look right in their eye because they want to tell you something. And it's something, it may be impactful, but it's something that is important to them. So if you just pay attention to these little clues, you can make a huge positive impact on people. You can make your brand stand out, and they probably won't even know why, right? A lot of this stuff kind of happens subconsciously, and people won't even realize why they like you or want to do business with you or trust you, but they will. All right. When you're shaking hands also in the wintertime, and this isn't as big a problem in Atlanta because it's not that cold, but if you're wearing gloves, and take your glove off to shake hands, and the other person may not, that's fine. It's pretty simple. Just grab it with your left hand and then extend. That sends a huge message to people that I care enough, to do this. It's like flipping the sunglasses up, but it's more expected. I mean, I would definitely always take your glove off. All right. So let's talk about the next step. After you shake hands and after you make eye contact, then the next thing people are going to assess your brand on is your articulation. So how you speak. I want you guys to realize that I'm telling you these things so you'll know them. I'm not telling you these things to judge how anyone speaks. But I want you to know how people perceive what you say. Okay? So be very careful about three things: grammar, vocabulary, and enunciation. So when I say grammar, I don't mean a preposition at the end of a sentence. We all do that. I don't mean a split infinitive. We all do that. The biggest one, the most egregious one, the one that's going to tarnish your brand, though, is subject-verb disagreement, right? Or double negative. If you do one of those things, immediately the person listening is going to lower not only their consideration of your brand, but also their expectations of you. So just be careful about those things. And like I said, colloquialism, slang, prepositions at the end of a sentence, all that's cool. Just be careful of the really egregious ones. All right, so here's why vocabulary is important. Because vocabulary is the way that people who don't know each other assess the other one's intelligence. Right? So apparently it only takes a few thousand words to communicate. I think it's 10,000 or something. But in the English language, there's tens of thousands of words, 50, 60,000 words. So what are all the rest of them for? The rest of them are for a couple of things. One is to get a very precise meaning, right? Another one is to help you formulate a concept in your own mind. So if you search and find exactly the right word for a concept, then that whole concept becomes encompassed in that one word, and that makes the thought process a lot more efficient. Because your cognitive resources, your ability to think at any one time is limited, so we need to be efficient about how we do it. All right. But it also, choosing exactly the right word conveys the meaning that you want to convey, all packaged up neatly to the other person. And the more precise words you use, the better impression they have of your brand. Now, I will add this caveat. Be really careful not to use a word you don't precisely understand, because that takes a potential positive way to the negative side, right? And I know 60-year-old men who do this, but as soon as you do it, people are going to change their perception of you. Now, because we live in this wonderful day and age when we have these computers in our pocket, there's no reason not to look up any word you don't understand. I do it all the time. I probably do it a couple of times a day, right? Just because I want to make sure, I want to know, right? I want to be fastidious about it. Fastidious means attention to detail, right? All right, so vocabulary is important because it encapsulates thoughts and delivers them efficiently, and because it tells someone about your brand. All right, the other one's articulation, the other one is enunciation. And enunciation is important because if someone doesn't understand what you say, it doesn't matter what you say. So if you don't enunciate it clearly, if you don't pronounce the words clearly, it doesn't matter what you've said if they don't get it, if they don't understand you. And here's another thing. Don't make people work to understand you, right? If you're trying to get somebody to be your customer, or get somebody to hire you, or get somebody to give you a promotion, or get a professor to help you, then you want them to clearly understand what you want and need. Enunciate clearly, use precise vocabulary, and it will affect that interaction, that relationship, in ways the other person won't even be aware of, but in ways that will help you dramatically. All right. So, what we're talking about tonight are often called essential skills. And they're called essential because they are essential to your success. Right? Now you may say, well, I can get a job or I can do this or that without doing these things you're talking about. Yeah, but you can only go so far. There'll be a ceiling on how and how far you can go, what job you can get, what money you can make, unless you understand these skills are essential to get past that level. Right? All right. So the next part of essential skills is a lot of times it's called body language. And I'm always nervous talking about this one because you guys are going to be assessing my body language as I'm talking. But the psychologists call it nonverbals. So nonverbal communication. Well, it turns out that humans communicate in thousands and thousands of ways with each other, and only a little bit of that's verbal. Most of it's nonverbal. And most of it's even subconscious, right? So there's a bunch of things you can tweak and change about the way you move or the facial expression or your intonation that will deliver your message in a much more effective way, regardless of what you actually say. And again, these things tend to be subconscious, and the other person may not know why they like you or why they want to work with you, but they will. All right, so the first thing people hear about body language is don't cross your arms. And that's true. Crossing your arms shows that you are closed, that you do not want to talk to this person, that you're putting a barrier between you and me. I want this barrier. Maybe I'm defensive, maybe I'm insecure, maybe I'm just preoccupied. Okay, so if you rule out crossing your arms, and I'm not saying it's always wrong, sometimes it's perfect for the situation, but if you rule out crossing your arms, which I virtually have, you got to have something to do with them, right? When you're talking, you can gesture, but when you're listening, what do you do with your hands? All right, so the experts say that you should not put them in your pockets. I happen to disagree. This is like hugging. I disagree. I think seeing a speaker with his or her hands in their pockets is fine. I don't think that's a bad message. Particularly maybe if they do it really intentionally at a certain part of the conversation to make a point. But even just to rest your hands, I think that looks fine. Other people don't think it looks fine, so you guys need to decide whether you want to use that one or not. But, okay, so let's say you're not going to put your hands in your pockets. What are you going to do with them? You're trying to convey the best message to the other person. You're trying to make them appreciate, want to do business with your brand. What do? All right, the next thing is people want to do this. They cross their hands in front like this. All right, that leaves your chest open, so you're not putting a barrier between you and the other person. It seems okay. And it is okay as far as the connection, but it makes you look weak. It's a very weak position. And I would say you do want to subjugate your preferences to other people's preferences in order to build a relationship, but you don't want to do it by looking weak. You don't want to convey that message that I'm weak. You want to convey a message that I'm strong and confident, and I want to do business with you. So, okay, we're gonna rule this out. Now, where do your hands go? They go to your side, but that's incredibly uncomfortable. I don't know how it looks from up there, but it's very uncomfortable. There is one little caveat here, and Ronald Reagan said this. When you're standing on a stage or somebody's introducing you or you're on a panel or whatever, and there's somebody else speaking, but you can be seen by the audience, this is the best thing to do. Put your hands straight by your side in a group photo. So every year we take these photos for the Clayton County Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. Every year you see people like this and you see me like this. If you're a man, you can cup your hands right under your jacket. But hands by your side is good for a picture. It's good if you're waiting and being introduced. But it's not good just for general conversations. So that brings us to this. And this is what I suggest. Put your hands behind your back like this and lock your wrists. I think it looks good. It's open. It's not a weak position. It's a strong position because you're saying, I'm strong enough to put my hands behind me. It says, I trust you. And then, when it's your turn to talk, they can come out very easily and start gesturing, right? So if they're in your pockets, it can get a little cumbersome, but if they're behind you, they can just flow out into the conversation, right? And then go right back as the other person's talking. That's the best way I've found of using your hands. All right, so watch people talk. Watch your professors when they're lecturing. Watch people on television talk, and you'll see that they do this gesture, especially when they're making points. If they're talking in bullet points, da-dut, 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 okay? That's a powerful gesture. But you know what's more powerful than that? Use two hands. Parallel hands. When I said this, I meant this and then this. Right? Da-dut, da-dut, da-dut. Parallel hands. That's a very strong gesture. It captures people's attention and it delineates your points. So they realize, okay, this is, you know how much easier it is to read something when there's bullet points, how much quicker? Well, that's the same thing. This is a bullet point for a conversation. Da-dut, da-dut, da-dut. Parallel hands. So remember that. And if you don't want to be quite that forceful, you can just use the one, right? All right. The next thing about this whole nonverbal body language thing is proximity or personal space. So this is different for different people, and you have to kind of play it by ear. But as a rule of thumb, for most people, this is a pretty comfortable space right here. So if the other person is standing at the end of your palms. Now, if you're an introvert like me, it's more like that, maybe like this. But it's a personal preference, so here's what I would recommend. Pay attention to the other person's preference. If you want to do business with them, or you want them to hire you or promote you or whatever, then you want to subjugate your preference to their preference. Now, several years ago, I owned a business that was located in a state-owned facility. So the state of Georgia was my landlord, which made it very difficult to get things fixed because state government's extremely slow. But the guy who was in charge of maintenance was a guy named Andy Stanton, and Andy loved to talk close like this. He was close talking Andy. Well, I realized that if I subjugated my preference and kind of the norm to Andy's preference, then he was willing to do a lot of things for me. He was willing to fix my cooler or, fix the leak and whatever. And so I would, spend several minutes talking to Andy this close. You know what? He still likes me. He doesn't know why. He still likes me to this day. But I got all kinds of maintenance requests pushed through the system because I was willing to talk closely to Andy. I was willing to subjugate my preference to his preference. And with all this stuff, that's what you want to do, right? All right, another story about that proximity thing is I used to have a customer, and his personal preference was way more than normal. It was like 8 or 10 feet. And it was like, you couldn't talk, you couldn't hear him because he was so far across the room. And we were working in a pretty small office, so it was kind of easy to back Bobby up against the wall because you could just take a couple steps, and all of a sudden, he couldn't get away from you. His 10 feet ran out. Now, I didn't do that to him very often because he was the customer and I wanted to sell him something, so what'd I do? I subjugated my preference to his preference, and I just listened across that distance to write his order down. Pay attention to this stuff because it affects how the other person wants to relate to you, right? It affects their motivation to relate to you, to do business with you, whatever you want to happen becomes easier if you understand these things. All right, here's an interesting one that I think is pretty unusual to talk about. Have you guys ever watched Anderson Cooper on CNN? Okay, so Anderson Cooper, they all do it, but on his show particularly, they'll put one screen with his face on it and another screen with whoever he's interviewing on it. So this person's somewhere else or whatever. He's in Atlanta or New York. They're on split screen, right? While the other person's talking, watch Anderson Cooper's face. He has a great listening face. He can convey with that listening face that he is both interested but calm, right? He's not conveying that I'm waiting to say the next word, I'm waiting for you to stop so I can say what I want to say. He's also not conveying, oh, I'm bored, would you shut up? He's right in the middle. He's right in that, hey, I'm interested, but I'm in no hurry. Go ahead and talk. It's a great listening face. All right, now, listening face is important because I have a friend, a good friend, who is a relatively successful business person, could probably be more so, but he has a terrible listening face. Because I know him, I know he really does care about what other people are saying. I know he really is interested, but you couldn't tell it from looking at him. Because when somebody else is talking, he's like, I mean, it scared me when I first met him. I was like, dang, this guy doesn't like me at all. Well, it's not true, but he's conveying the wrong message. The problem with the listening face, though, is you can't see your own face, so it's a little bit hard. You may ask your friends to tell you, or you may do it on video. You really can't do it in the mirror because, you know, it's like that Hawthorne effect. Because you're watching, you change. But video works, so practice your listening face. Or maybe this, if you get a bad reaction from somebody, change. Like, oh, maybe it's my listening face. All right, there's something that the technical term is neuro-linguistic programming, but kind of the juxt of it is what's called mirroring. All right, this is a body language or soft skills or nonverbal technique by which you can connect with another person and endear yourself to them without them realizing it, very much like this other stuff, but this one is a little more powerful than most. So when you're talking to someone, make the same gesture they make or put your body in the same position theirs is in. This is easier at a table, by the way, but it can be done anywhere. Now, here's a warning, though. Don't do it so it looks like you're imitating them, because that'll turn them off really quickly. So you can't literally be a mirror, but if somebody keeps making this gesture, you can kind of put your hands like this, you know. And if you're sitting at a table, it works great because people will put their hands on the table. They'll do stuff, you know. They'll put them this way, put them this way, put them this way. If you just subtly do those things, slowly, inconspicuously, they connect with you. They're like, wow, this guy like. If somebody leans forward, lean forward. If they lean back, lean back. But just slowly, subtly, right? Okay. I got a friend who, when she's making a point, taps her nails on the desk. So I just put my hand on the desk like this. No tapping, just in the same configuration. Right? All right, now, another thing about this mirroring that's really cool is where your feet are. Now, if you're standing up, obviously you can see each other's feet. But even if you're sitting at a table, this works. Even if you can't see the person's feet under the table or they can't see yours, this works because you put your body in a certain position based on the way your feet point, and we are a lot more perceptive than we know we are. So you're sending a signal by the way your feet are pointing, even if another person can't see your feet. And it's very intuitive. It's if your feet are pointing at somebody, you're listening and engaged, right? So if their feet are pointing at you, they are really into what you're saying. That's cool. What you want to watch for is if somebody's feet start turning. If one foot turns away, that's just like, hey, I'm kind of running out of time, but I'm still interested, you know. But if somebody ever turns both feet away from you and starts talking to you like this, huge warning sign. At that point, you've lost them. You've lost their interest. They're just being polite, but you're wearing down your relationship by continuing. Now, there's a couple of things you can do. You can just say, "Hey, I'll talk to you later. I see you got to go," or whatever. I don't want to take up any more of your time. The other thing you can do is a little more complicated, but you can explore what is it that's lost their interest, or what would get it back, right? So maybe you're talking about this assembly line at the business, and they don't care about assembly lines. They care about sales. So all of a sudden you think to yourself, this guy's feet are pointing away from me. Oh, he's a sales guy. If you start talking about sales, you'll get him back, right? So it's just an indicator. You won't necessarily know why you've lost him, but you will know you have. And on the other side of the table, use this to convey to somebody that you're engaged, you're listening, you care what they think, right? Now, there's something interesting about this. you may not care what they think, but you want to convey that you do. But also, here's the cool thing. When you do these things that engage you with the eye contact, with the feet, with the body language, you do tend to become engaged, right? It kind of works on you in reverse, which is fantastic because people can sense that. And you know what? People want to do business with people that they feel comfortable with. So comfort is as important as competency in a lot of cases. And in fact, I've seen some really incompetent people who have good jobs because the boss is comfortable with them. What you want is both. You want a high competency level and a high comfort level, and then you're golden, right? All right. So the next thing is really intuitive. Everybody knows it already, but we don't do it. That's smile. It's huge, but we don't do it, right? When you pass somebody in the hall or pass somebody on campus, the worst thing is you probably ignore them. And I'm an introvert, really. I mean, I would just as soon ignore people. But the next thing you may do is just acknowledge them, like, kind of look up or whatever. The best thing you can do, though, is smile. And it only takes a second. When you're passing a coworker in the hall, it only takes a second to smile, right? It's easy, it's powerful, but we forget to do it. So remember we talked in the beginning about being intentional. So be intentional about all this stuff. But smiling is like the easiest one, but you got to be intentional to make it work. You got to be intentional to do it. All right. Now we're going to kind of jump from like basic essential skills to a little more of an advanced level. So there's this Harvard psychologist named Amy Cuddy, C-U-D-D-Y. And Amy Cuddy was one of these people who really was a brilliant student, like I described earlier. The opposite of me. She had all this academic proclivity, academic giftedness. Making straight A's was always easy her whole life. So she gets through high school, taking all AP classes and dual enrollment classes, and she gets into an Ivy League school. She gets into an Ivy League college. But then, very shortly thereafter, like her freshman year, she got in a car wreck. And she sustained head trauma in this car wreck. And the results of that were that she wasn't smart anymore. Not in an academic way. So this is a great TED Talk. You guys should go just pull up Amy Cuddy TED Talk and listen to her tell it. But she lost the thing that her whole ego was built around. Her whole ego was built around being a smart person. And then she wasn't anymore. And she kind of had to cobble together, hey, now what do I do? Well, part of the way she put her life back together, got back into an Ivy League college, and became a Harvard professor eventually, was by doing what I'm about to tell you about. So Amy Cuddy's research is about, some of her research is about this thing called power posing. And we all know that when certain things happen in our brain, certain neurochemicals are released, it causes our body to do certain things. So for instance, if someone wins a race or wins a ball game, they go like this. Now that is a natural reaction. You can, on the flyer that we sent out for this, I'm doing that in the flyer, right? That's a natural reaction. Everybody does it. It's innate. Apparently, even blind people who've never seen anybody do that when they feel like they've won, a victory. All right, so what Amy Cuddy taught us with her research is that the connection between your mind, your brain, and your body that causes this to happen works both ways. So this is an electrical circuit where the current can run either way. Okay, think about what that means. That means if you do this, you're going to release the neurochemicals in your brain that would have made you do that. You're going to increase your confidence dramatically. So the way you can use this in a very practical way is when you're on the way to a meeting or a presentation or about to give a speech like this, make sure that you're very open, and you can even do the V pose. Go in the bathroom or go in your room or something. Do the V pose. It doesn't take but a few seconds before those neurochemicals start releasing, and that will increase your confidence dramatically. Now, what happens when you're outside somebody's office and you're waiting to see them? Maybe it's an important client or a prospective client or your boss or whatever. You're sitting in the waiting area, and it's natural to do this. You're looking at your phone, you're hunched over, your body's all you may even have your legs crossed like this. All right, that's the opposite of a power pose, right? That's sending the wrong neurochemicals to your body, to your brain. What you want to do is sit in an open way, like this. You can still cross your leg, but make it open, and maybe put your hand on the other chair. You can still look at your phone, but just don't be crunched up, right? Because what you want to do is make sure that the signal you're sending your brain is that I'm confident, that I am powerful, that I know what I'm doing. And so I sold my company last October. It's almost been a year. And I used this extremely effectively in the negotiations. So I would have these guys who might want to buy the company come to see me. And I would stand in my office and do this, and get ready before they got there. Because I really needed these guys to buy the company from my perspective, right? But they needed to perceive me as being confident and competent. And this was a huge, huge tool that I used. It was just great luck that I saw Amy Cuddy's TED Talk before I started that process. Fantastic. Okay, so the V pose is probably the most pronounced one, but any kind of open pose, right? So even if you're riding in your car, you're on the way to a meeting. Instead of doing this, put this arm up on the window and put this hand over on the other seat. Just open it up a little bit, right? Or put your hand, like I've got this little ridge right there where the sunroof is. I put my hand up there, right? And then the other motorists drive by and go, but I don't care. It makes a huge difference, and it's neurological, right? So what I built my coaching practice on is not just teaching people about business. It's about teaching people how to use neurology and psychology. It's called cognitive psychology, and how to use psychology and economics. It's called behavioral economics, right? And to combine those things into a more effective strategy, a more effective way to convey their message. So all this stuff is science-based, right? I'm not going to tell you anything that's just my opinion. Everything's been sourced from multiple places. All right.
Well, some of the kids going to have to go, so.
Okay. All right, we got about 7 minutes, and that's a good place to stop and ask for questions. So, yes, sir. Significance ideation. And I chose that name, significance ideation, because significance to me, this is not the dictionary definition, significance to me means peace of mind and positive impact, right? And ideation is just thinking of ideas, and ideas are like the currency. Because you can go to work for somebody and just do a job, and you'll get paid to just do a job. But if you want to really do well, you have to come up with new ideas, different ideas. So, Hunter.
So, earlier you were making a comment about in certain situations, like if you're waiting to be introduced or if you're in a picture, you would stand up and have your arms by your sides, and you mentioned you do the thing with your fingers. I'm wondering what is the advantage of doing that?
It just looks better to the audience. It doesn't feel good, but it looks better. It looks good in the picture. When somebody's attention's really on the speaker and you're standing over there, it's just a way. It's just a way not to be distracting. Yes, ma'am.
So when you're talking about, bridging the gap and acquiescing to other people's perceptions and whatnot, needs, how does that work in a global situation where maybe different cultures don't accept like an open handshake, or especially like the sexual gap, like where women are not supposed to touch men or
Right.
anything like that? How does that work?
So the first thing I noticed was she said acquiesce. That's a great vocabulary word. It changed my opinion of her immediately.
Thanks.
Okay, now look what I'm doing. I'm leaning towards her. Both my feet are pointing towards her. Right? I'm interested. I'm engaged. And then she impresses me with a vocabulary word. Okay, so education, being very aware of the circumstance. So before you engage people of another culture, you got to know these things. You want to know what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's preferable, right? So knowledge is the big thing here. And then you just adjust your preference to their preference, whatever their preference is. Like you said, if it's a taboo for men and women to touch, then you know that. It's easy to do the thing when you know the thing.
Right.
You just gotta be really intentional about knowing it.
Okay.
Yes.
So you had a very successful startup. What would you say was the one thing that made you so successful? What do you think like you couldn't do, it wouldn't have been as successful without that element?
Wow, very good question.
You want to repeat it just so people.
So she said, I had a successful startup business. What was the one thing that I did that made that happen? The one thing that without that it would not have been as successful. My answer, I might not be able to answer it, the one thing, because starting a business is tough and there are a lot of things that have to come together. Maybe that's kind of the biggest lesson, is that you may be good at one part of the business. You may be good at sales. You may be good at finance, at manufacturing, at logistics. But if you're going to start your own business, you got to know about all that stuff. So I'm not, a general knowledge maybe is kind of the non-answer that I want to give you, because that's really what it is. Okay, and here, let me add this to it. If you are great at one thing, make sure that surround yourself with people who can fill in the gaps. Okay, that's always an important concept in business. And I'll add, I'll give you a freebie. One of the secrets to success is to surround yourself with people who will pull you up and then push you to be your best. Whether they're your employees or your friends or your board of directors, whoever they are. Yes, ma'am.
I kind of wanted to go back to when you were talking about vocabulary, enunciation, all that good stuff. I tend to have a habit of being at a loss for words sometimes when I'm talking to people, especially because of my nervous habits. What do you suggest for that? I sometimes it's not that I don't know a word to use, like acquiescence, but should I just use the try to define it out versus trying to find the actual word that I'm looking for, or should I pause and actually look for that, like think about that word
Okay, so
when I'm talking to someone? Yeah.
So the difficulty you described was not apparent in your question. Your question was fluid. And your body language was great.
Sometimes it happens.
I know. All right, so here's the thing. You know what makes the difference between a good presentation and a bad presentation, or a good speech and a bad speech? It's not really knowing the hard facts. It's being able to recruit those words at the right moment, or those phrases at the right moment, right? So the way to do that is to do the power posing, to know how your mind works. So before I come and do something like this, I go and I'm alone for a while, right? I know not to plan meetings back to back to back to back, because that'll drain all my cognitive resources. So I would just say, if your mind is prepared, in a way, you've got to learn how to prepare your own mind. But then you'll do that word recruitment that you're talking about a lot more easily. There's also some tricks with B12 and protein, and you want to eat or drink protein right before you're going to be in high pressure situations, and B12, B6, and niacin are super important for word recruitment.
Definitely.
One more.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Should you always dress very professional or just average?
I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Should you always dress very professional?
Okay, so my thing about dress is that you should Dress appropriate to the situation. And I dress at the high end of the range. So if I know some people are going to be wearing a suit and tie, I'll wear a suit and tie. I just go to the high end of the range. I think it always works. But appropriate to the situation. You don't want to be wearing a suit and tie and everybody else is wearing shorts and T-shirts. The only thing I would say is don't pick your clothes up off the floor and put them on all wrinkled. And so, hey, I want to give you one more thing, and that is, because we talked about it at dinner, that is how to stop yourself from using So, you think that resonated? Okay, here's the thing. When we're formulating thoughts, we need to buy a little bit of time. It's microseconds, but you need to buy time to formulate your thoughts because you want your thoughts to march out in fully formed sentences, right? And the way we buy time is to put in one of those little filler words like Um's the most common one. You know, you can say, some people say like. My daughter says like. You can say like. Okay. We still need to do that, but what I've noticed about listening to smart people talk on NPR, on Bloomberg, on a bunch of podcasts I listen to, smart people just do this one little trick. All right? So if that filler word is like a shirt, they use just a prettier shirt. It's still serving the same purpose. It's still covering your body, but it's a different shirt, and the different shirt is so. If you say so instead of all of a sudden, you've still bought the same amount of time, but you seem smart. I swear, that's a great trick. It works.
Come on, we got one more question. I know that's a good one.
Yes, ma'am.
Enunciation, and I'm kind of piggybacking a little bit off of what she said, but what about regional dialects and cultural, like she was kind of saying? You said it's a turnoff, but different regions have different dialects,
So, all right, so the question is, different regions have different dialects, different colloquialisms, and she said, I said it's a turnoff to use them, so how do you reconcile that? I use colloquialisms and I use slang, but I do it very specifically, right? Just be aware. Just know when it's appropriate to use that, when you're in a situation. You want to relate to people, so if you can effectively use the same dialect and colloquialisms they do, fine. Now, if you're not familiar with those, you may seem like you're making fun of them, so you probably just want to avoid it. But if I go to South Georgia, I can talk like I'm in South Georgia. That's why I don't like to do this, because people catch me. So, it goes back to being intentional. Just be aware of the situation. And it's almost like being bilingual. I can speak to this person in their dialect and their colloquialisms, and this person in theirs, and I can talk to the president of Coca-Cola. It doesn't matter. So,
Lon, thank you very much.
yes, sir.
Thank you very much on that.